That barn is not happening, and I will personally make sure of it. That was the first thing Sharon DeMarco ever said to me that mattered, and she said it standing in my own gravel drive with a clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. She was the president of the Stone Hollow Homeowners Association, and she had decided that the pole barn I wanted to build on my own 40 acres was, in her words, an aesthetic threat to the character of the community. I was 61 years old. I had owned that land for 19 years. And what Sharon did not know, what she never once bothered to check in the 3 years that followed, was that the small county building office that issued every permit she was counting on to stop me was, if a clipboard showed up in your driveway and told you that you could not build a barn on land your family had bled for, what would you have done? My name is Walt Hendren. I spent 34 years as a structural plans examiner, and then a building official, which is a fancy way of saying I read permit applications for a living and told people whether the thing they wanted to build would fall down or not. I retired at 58, bought out my pension, and moved my daughter and myself up to a parcel at the edge of Stone Hollow, in the foothills where the pasture runs up into pine. 40 acres. A modest house my late wife Dana and I had drawn on a napkin one winter and then built ourselves over 2 summers. Dana passed 4 years before this story starts, and the barn I wanted to put up was going to hold the wood shop she never got to see finished. So when Sharon told me the barn was not happening, she was talking about a building with my wife's name on the plan sheet, though she did not know that either. I want to be clear about something at the start, because it matters to how the rest of this went. The 40 acres I own are not, and have never been, inside the Stone Hollow Homeowners Association. The HOA covers a subdivision of 72 lots that a developer carved out of the old Pruitt Ranch in the 90s. My land sits next to that subdivision. It shares a property line with it for about 900 feet along the western edge. It predates the subdivision by 60 years. It was never platted into it, and there is not one word in the Stone Hollow covenants that touches my deed. I knew this, the way I knew my own name, because reading deeds and plats and covenants had been my trade for 3 decades. Sharon believed, with the certainty of someone who has never been told no, that my land was, as she liked to put it, functionally part of our community. It was not, functionally or any other way. The first notice came on a Tuesday in March. I remember it was a Tuesday because I had just driven my daughter Casey to the early bus. And when I came back up the drive, there was a letter taped to my gatepost. It was on Stone Hollow letterhead, which is to say it was on paper somebody had run off a home printer with a logo at the top, and it informed me that my proposed accessory structure was in violation of community architectural standards and that I was to cease all planning immediately. I had not broken ground. I had not even pulled a permit yet. All I had done was have a survey crew out the week before to stake the footprint, and apparently somebody in the subdivision had seen the flags and called Sharon. I did the thing I always did. I took the letter inside, I dated it, and I put it in a manila folder I labeled Stone Hollow in black marker. That folder is the reason I am able to tell you this story with the numbers intact. I had kept files my whole working life. After-action notes. I called them a habit from my first job out of the service. You write down what happened while you still remember it, and you put it somewhere you can find it. By the time this was over, that one folder had become 4 binders, and every page in them was dated, and not one of them ever had to be invented after the fact. Casey was 15 that spring. She is my late wife's daughter, and mine sharp as a tack, and she had a habit of reading over my shoulder. She read that first notice at the kitchen table while I dated it, and she said, Dad, can they even do that? I told her the truth, which was, no, they could not, and that the interesting part of the answer was going to be how long it took Sharon to find that out. Write it down, Casey said. She was joking. I wrote it down. The habit was older than Casey. Came from my first job, before the building department, before Dana even. You learn in certain lines of work that memory is a liar and paper is not, and that the man who can hand you a dated page wins the argument. The man with the better story loses. For 34 years, I had read other people's paper for the county and the city. I had seen 1,000 disputes between neighbors and contractors and inspectors, and I'd watched every single time the one with the records walk out whole and the one with the grievance walk out with nothing. The lesson sank into me so deep it stopped feeling like a strategy and started feeling like manners. You keep your file. You date your file. You do not raise your voice because a raised voice does not stamp received. The land itself was the reason any of it mattered. I want you to understand what the 40 acres were, because Sharon never once tried to understand it, and that was the whole shape of her. Dana and I had bought the parcel. In the spring of the year our marriage turned 10, we could barely afford it. It had a collapsed homestead cabin on it, and a spring-fed stock pond, and a stand of ponderosa that ran up the slope to a ridge where you could see 3 counties on a clear day. We camped on it the first summer in a canvas tent while we cleared the building site by hand. We drew the house on the back of a paper placemat from a diner in town one January night. The kitchen here, the wood stove there, a window on the west wall to catch the light off the pond. Then we built it, the two of us, over 2 summers, with help from anyone we could trade labor with. Dana set the ridge beam herself, balanced up there in her work gloves, laughing at me for being nervous. She wanted a wood shop more than anything, a real one, with good light, where she could finally turn the cherry she had been hoarding for years. We never got to it. She got sick the winter. The house was finally done, and she was gone within the year, and the cherry is still stacked and stickered in the corner of what is now, at last, her shop. So when a woman in a magenta blazer drove up my gravel to tell me the barn was not happening, she was not stopping a building, she was stepping on a grave she did not even know was there. I did not tell her that. Some things you do not hand to people like Sharon. You just remember them while you file. I should tell you who Sharon DeMarco was, because the shape of this whole thing depends on her and on the man behind her. Sharon had been president of the Stone Hollow HOA for 11 years by then, re-elected by a board of 5 people, most of whom never attended a meeting. She drove a white luxury SUV with a vanity plate, and she wore a magenta blazer to every confrontation, like it was a uniform, which, in a way, it was. She kept a clipboard and a roll of violation stickers in the back seat. And her husband, a man named Greg DeMarco, ran a development company that was at that exact moment trying to assemble enough adjacent acreage to build a gated luxury enclave on the western slope. The slope that my 40 acres sat on top of. I did not know that last part yet. I would find it out the way you find out most things, slowly, from a stack of public records. The second escalation came in April. Sharon showed up in person. I was out by the staked footprint with a coffee mug when her SUV came up my drive and stopped, and she got out in the magenta blazer and the white sneakers that no one who actually walks on a ranch would ever wear, and she planted herself and said the line I told you at the start. That barn is not happening, and I will personally make sure of it. I asked her calmly what jurisdiction she thought she had over my deed. She told me that as a neighboring property, I was bound by the spirit of the community standards even if I had, as she put it, found some loophole to avoid joining formally. There was no loophole. There was a property line and 60 years of recorded history. I did not argue. I said, "You should put that in writing, Sharon." She said she would be delighted to. That was escalation number 2. And it went in the folder. What she did, instead of checking the deed, was go to the county. And this is the part where my old trade started to matter. Stone Hollow sits in a small rural county, and the county building and permits office was, frankly, a mess. 2 employees, a backlog that ran months, a part-time official who had inherited the job and hated it. Sharon knew somebody on the county commission because Greg's company did business with the county constantly, and she leaned on that relationship to make sure my barn permit, when I filed it, would die quietly in a drawer. She did not need the law on her side. She needed the office on her side. For a while, she had it. I filed my permit application in May. It was, if I say so myself, a perfect application. 34 years of reading other people's mistakes had taught me how to make none of my own. Stamped engineering, a site plan that showed every setback with feet to spare, a soils report. I walked it into the county office myself and handed it to a tired woman named Brenda at the counter. And I watched her stamp it received, and I got my copy of that stamp, dated, and it went in the folder. Then nothing happened. For 60 days, nothing happened. The state code said they had 30 days to act on a complete application. I knew that code better than the man who was supposed to be enforcing it. On day 61, I drove back down. The part-time official, a man named Doyle, met me at the counter and told me, not quite meeting my eyes, that there had been concerns raised about my application and that it was under review. I asked, "What concerns?" He said, "Neighborhood compatibility." I asked which code section governed neighborhood compatibility for a permitted accessory structure on unzoned agricultural land, because I knew there was none. Doyle did not have an answer. What he had was a phone call from a commissioner and a fear of losing the only job he had. I did not blame Doyle. I want to be honest about that. Doyle was a man being squeezed, and I have been squeezed in my time. His review, the one with no code section behind it, was escalation number 3. That summer, the escalations came faster. By June, Sharon had the HOA's lawyer send me a letter threatening to record a lien against my property for unpaid association, dues I had never owed because I had never been a member of the association. A lien is a serious thing. It clouds your title. It can stop you from refinancing or selling, and a clouded title is exactly what you want on a man you are quietly trying to force into selling, though I did not understand that part of it yet. I took that letter to the county recorder myself the next morning, and I asked the clerk, a steady older man named Hollis, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, whether such a lien had been recorded against my parcel. He typed my parcel number in without a word and waited for the screen and said, "Not yet. Nothing recorded." I thanked him and turned to go. And then I turned back, because Hollis had the look of a man who had questions of his own. We got a talking. He had been recording deeds in that county for 30 years, married to the work the way I had been, and when I described my situation, he pulled my deed and the Stone Hollow plat up on his screen and set them side by side and looked at them a long, slow moment, the way a man reads a thing he already half knows. "Your land's not in it," he said finally. "I know," I said. He looked at me over the top of the glasses. "Does she know that?" he asked. I said, "She has never once looked." 30 years, he said, and the ones who never look are always the loudest. He told me that if anybody ever did try to record a bad lien against me, I should walk straight back into him, and he would show me exactly how to record a notice of dispute against it the same hour. Hollis filed that conversation away. So did I. I wrote his name in the folder with the word ally next to it, which is a thing I do, and which turned out, months later, to matter more than I knew when I wrote it. A clouded title. A pressure campaign. I want you to notice that I am telling you these words now, the way I understand it now, and that at the time I did not have them. At the time it was just one more thing in the folder, dated June, a letter with no lien behind it from a lawyer who should have known better. The shape of a thing is always clearer from the porch afterward than it is from inside the weather. That is part of why I keep the folder. The folder is how you read the weather. Later. By July, Casey had started keeping her own notes, which I had not asked her to do. She was 16 by then, and she had a phone. And when the HOA started parking a car at the end of my drive to photograph my property, she photographed the car license plate, time, date. She saved everything to the cloud and to a thumb drive she kept in a drawer, because I had taught her, without quite meaning to, that one copy of anything is the same as no copy. Escalation 4 was the surveillance car. It sat there, 3 afternoons running a gray sedan, a man inside it with a long lens, and on the third day, Casey walked down to the gate with her own phone held up and stood there filming him, filming us until he rolled up his window and drove off. She came back up the hill grinning. Got him, she said. She had. Plate, face, timestamp, the whole thing, and it went on the thumb drive and into the folder by date that same night. Escalation 5 came in August. On a Thursday, a little after 10 in the morning. 2 men in a pickup with magnetic signs on the doors that read County Compliance, signs you can order off the internet for $40, drove up my road and informed me that they were there to inspect for unpermitted construction. There was no construction. There was a staked footprint and a pile of lumber under a tarp. These men had clipboards and lanyards and the easy confidence of people who have never once been asked to prove who they are. And the older of the 2, a heavyset man in a polo shirt, started walking past me toward the staked footprint, like the land was already half his. "We have authority to inspect," he said over his shoulder. That is the moment the whole thing changed for me, because that is the moment it stopped being a paperwork fight and became people putting on costumes of authority they did not have. I stepped in front of him. Not fast, not loud. I just put my body between him and my wife's footprint, and I asked, level, for credentials. He held up the lanyard. I asked him to put the card in my hand. When he finally did, it was a laminated card from a company called Stone Hollow Compliance Services, LLC. A name I had never heard, with a logo somebody had clearly made on a home computer. I read it twice out loud so the camera would catch it, because Casey was already filming from the porch the way I had taught her. Then I handed it back and I told both men they were standing on private property, that there was no such thing as a county compliance officer in a polo shirt with a $40 door sign, and that they had 10 seconds to be off my road. The younger one was already backing toward the truck. The older one looked at me, looked at Casey's phone, and made the only smart decision he made all day. They left. I wrote the plate down before the dust settled. That company, Stone Hollow Compliance Services, LLC, had been incorporated, I learned later, 6 weeks earlier, by Greg DeMarco. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and I added it up out loud. The way I do, because Dana used to say I think with my mouth. 5 formal escalations, 1 fake inspection, One threatened lien, and not a single one of them had a deed or a code section behind it. Casey sat across from me with the thumb drive in her hand and asked when I was going to fight back. I told her I had been fighting back the whole time. She did not understand that yet. The folder did not look like fighting to a 16-year-old. It looked like filing. Filing was the fight, and I told her so. I said, "Honey, loud people lose in quiet rooms, and the quiet room is coming." She did not believe me. She wrote down what I said. Anyway, I found it later in her notes, dated, in her handwriting. Loud people lose in quiet rooms. She had underlined it. Here is the thing about a county building office that two people run with a months-long backlog. It is not a fortress. It is a small operation held together by a part-time official and an exhausted counter clerk and a budget the commission complains about every single year. I had spent 34 years inside offices exactly like that one. I knew what they smelled like. The burnt coffee and the toner and the boxes of files nobody had time to scan. I knew the math of them too, the way two people cannot do the work of four, no matter how late they stay. And that fall, the county put the permits and inspections function out for what they called a public-private services contract, because they could not afford to staff it themselves, and the backlog had become a scandal in the local paper. They wanted a private firm to come in, take over plan review and permit processing under county oversight, and clear the backlog. They advertised it in the legal notices section of the county paper, where nobody reads, and they held a pre-bid meeting in a back room of the courthouse that almost nobody attended. I attended. Of course I attended. Reading legal notices was a thing I did with my coffee, the way other men read the box scores. I want to be careful how I say this next part, because it is the hinge of the whole story, and I do not want to dress it up as something cleverer than it was. I did not buy the county. You cannot buy a county, and I would not have wanted to if you could. What I did was call a man named Frank Ojeda. Frank had run a building department 2 counties over for 20 years, retired the same year I did, and spent his retirement bored half to death and fixing his neighbor's fences for something to do. I called him on a Sunday, and I told him about the contract and about the backlog, and in plain terms about Sharon. Frank was quiet a while. Then he said, "Walt, are you asking me to help you fix a county permit office, or are you asking me to help you settle a score?" I said, "Can it be both, if we do it by the book?" Frank laughed for the first time I had heard in years, and said he would bring his own stamp. We formed a small company, the two of us, with my retirement money and Frank's 2 retired building officials with current state certifications and clean records, and we bid on the public-private permits contract the county had put out to bid, in the open by law, for anyone to bid on. We were, frankly, the only people in 300 miles qualified to do it, and willing to work for what the county could pay. There was one other bid, from a firm in the city, that wanted twice the money and could not start for a year. The county commission, the same commission Sharon thought was in her pocket, awarded us the contract in November, because we were the only responsible bid and because a state grant required them to clear the backlog or lose the money. The thing Sharon had been leaning on, the office that was going to kill my barn permit, quietly in a drawer, was now going to be operated under county contract by me and Frank Ojeda. I did not tell Sharon. I am not in the business of announcements. Frank and I came in on a Monday, and Doyle, the part-time official, met us at the counter looking like a man waiting to be fired. He was not going to be fired. I told him that straight. I told him I had been Doyle once, a man with too much work and a commissioner on the phone, and that nobody was going to lose a job over what had been done to my application as long as it stopped now. Doyle's shoulders came down an inch. Then he told us the truth, all of it. The call from the commissioner, the instruction to let the Hendren file age, the fear. It went in the file. In Doyle's own words, signed and dated. Because that is who we are. And also because I knew by then exactly what was coming. The first thing we did, the thing the contract required us to do, was process the backlog in the order it was received, by date, with no regard to who had called which commissioner. My own barn permit was in that backlog. I did not touch it. I had Frank handle it, start to finish, so that no one could ever say I approved my own application, and I put that arrangement in writing the first day, a one-page memo recusing myself from the Hendren file, signed, dated, witnessed by Brenda at the counter. Frank reviewed it against the code, found it complete and compliant, which it was because I had built it that way, and issued it in December, signed by him, with the file showing it had sat illegally in a drawer for 191 days past the legal deadline. 191 days. That number went in the folder too. The barn permit being issued was not the climax. I want to be honest with you about the shape of this, because the satisfying part was not getting my piece of paper. The satisfying part was what happened when Sharon, who still did not know any of this, decided to escalate, one final time, into territory that was no longer just rude but actually criminal. Because in January, with my permit issued and my foundation poured, Sharon DeMarco filed a formal complaint with the county building office demanding that the permit for the Hendren barn be revoked, alleging that it had been issued in error and in violation of community standards. She filed it on the county's own complaint form. She filed it, without knowing it, with me. And here is where Greg's real scheme finally came up out of the records. Because a complaint like that triggers a file review, and the file review put Frank and me deep into the county's permitting history for the Western Slope. We sat in that office 2 nights, running with the boxes open and the bad coffee going. And we built a timeline on a long roll of butcher paper taped to the wall, the way I used to build them for hearings. Date by date, it told a story. Greg DeMarco's development company had, over the previous 2 years, submitted a series of applications for a gated luxury enclave on the Western Slope. 18 lots, a private road, a clubhouse. The applications were sketchy where it counted and detailed where it did not, the work of people who expected to be waved through. And every version of the site plan depended on the same thing, a contiguous block of land running from the subdivision's western edge up to the ridge. My 40 acres sat in the dead center of that block, not at the edge, the center. They could not build their enclave around my barn. They could not build it around me at all. The private road they had drawn ran straight through my stock pond. The clubhouse sat on the footprint of my wife's wood shop. And here is the part that put a cold weight in my chest when Frank laid the option contracts on the table. Greg's company had already bought options on the parcels on either side of mine, paying real money to tie up land for 2 years, betting the whole scheme on getting the piece in the middle. The piece in the middle was not for sale. So Sharon's entire campaign against my barn, the notices, the fake inspector, the surveillance car, the threatened lien, was never about aesthetics and never about community standards. It was a pressure campaign. It was about making my land unusable and unpleasant and frightening enough that an aging widower with a teenage daughter would do the sensible thing and sell to the only buyer who happened to be circling, at the price that buyer named. The barn was the thing I loved that they thought they could use to break me. Take the barn, take the heart out of the place, and the old man folds. The records showed it in dates and dollar figures and in Sharon's own filed complaints, every one of them now sitting in a county file I was bound by law to keep. It went in the binder, now binder 3. Frank looked at the butcher paper a long time and said, "Quiet, Walt. This isn't a homeowners association anymore. This is fraud with a clipboard." I said I knew. I said, "Let's make sure every page is dated." The reveal, when it came in a public meeting, the way these things should. The county commission held a regular monthly meeting in the small courtroom that doubled as their chamber, and Sharon had requested time on the agenda to demand the revocation of my permit, certain she was about to embarrass a stubborn old man in front of the people who mattered. She came in the magenta blazer. Greg sat in the second row. The county attorney was there, a careful woman named Pruitt, no relation to the old ranch, and the 5 commissioners and maybe 30 residents, and Casey, who sat in the back with her phone already recording because I had asked her to. I sat at the applicant's table in a clean shirt with the folder in front of me. Not the binders, just the one folder, the original. The one that started on a gatepost on a Tuesday in March. Sharon spoke first. She stood at the little podium, and she had notes, typed in a folder of her own, and she said, for the 3rd time in this story, and in front of witnesses, that my property was functionally part of the Stone Hollow community. She said the permit had been issued improperly, that the process had been corrupted, that the county owed it to the law-abiding residents of Stone Hollow to revoke it. She was good at it. 11 years of practice. Her voice did the thing practiced voices do, rising at the ends to dare anyone to disagree. Greg watched her from the second row, with his arms crossed, and a small smile, a man enjoying a show he had paid for. When she finished, she looked at me with something close to pity, the way you look at a man who is about to lose, and she sat down and folded her hands. The chair asked if the permit holder wished to respond. I did not stand up and make a speech. I have heard people make speeches at meetings like that, and it never once changed an outcome. What changes outcomes is a document and a person with the authority to read it. So I stayed in my chair and I asked the county attorney, Ms. Pruitt, if she would do me the courtesy of reading 2 things into the record. She glanced at the chair, who nodded, and she said she would. The first I said was my deed, recorded in 1961, with the legal description of the 40 acres. The second was the recorded plat of the Stone Hollow subdivision, recorded in 1994. I asked her to read the boundary calls of each, the meets and bounds, slowly, into the record. She did. It took about 4 minutes, and 4 minutes of meets and bounds read aloud is a long, dry, quiet thing in a room full of people who came for a fight. North 89 degrees, so many feet to an iron pin. Thence south, thence the meander of the pond. The room got restless and then it got still, because somewhere in the second description, people started to hear that the 2 sets of numbers were not touching. When she finished, Miss Pruitt looked up, and she looked at the 2 pages side by side in her hands, and she said the only thing that needed saying. These 2 descriptions do not overlap. This parcel is not within the subdivision. There is no boundary they share, except a fence line. The Stone Hollow covenants do not run with this deed. The room was very quiet. Sharon started to speak, and the chair held up a hand, not unkindly, the way you stop a child from interrupting. Then I asked Mrs. Pruitt to read one more thing into the record. The certificate of the Public-Private Services Contract for Permit Administration awarded by this commission the previous November, and to read the name of the firm operating the county building office. She found it in the packet. She read the firm name. Then she read the first principal, Frank Ojeda. Then she read the second, Walter Hendren. She paused on it. She looked up at me, and then she looked at the application table where I sat, and I watched her put it together, a half-second before the room did. I watched Sharon's face do the arithmetic. I watched the magenta blazer go very still. The complaint she had filed to revoke my permit had been filed, on the county's own form, with the office that I lawfully operated, against an application my partner had lawfully approved after it sat illegally in a drawer for 191 days, on land her own husband's recorded plat proved was never hers to govern. In the second row, Greg stopped looking at me and started looking at the door, and then at the county attorney, and then at his own hands. Nobody gloated. Nobody had to. I did not say a word past asking for the readings. The deed did the talking, and it had been recorded 65 years ago by a homesteader named Pruitt, who could not have imagined any of us, and it said what it had always said, which was that the land was the land and the line was the line, and no clipboard on earth could move either one. Casey, in the back, kept the phone steady. Later, she told me her hands were shaking the whole time. You could not tell from the video. She had been raised right. The consequences were not something I engineered. They were the automatic result of what the DeMarcos had already done, surfacing all at once in a public room. The county attorney was now looking at a complaint history, a fake inspection by a 6-week-old LLC called Stone Hollow Compliance Services, a threatened lien with no basis, and a development company whose principal had a clear financial interest in the harassment, all documented, all dated. Within a month, the state's attorney opened a file on the unlicensed inspection and the misuse of a county complaint process, and a man from that office came up my drive in a plain sedan, not to inspect anything, but to take a copy of Casey's video and a copy of the folder, which I made for him at the kitchen table while Casey poured him coffee. The county rescinded its informal accommodations to Greg's enclave applications and required them to be refiled cleanly, which, with my 40 acres immovably in the middle, now improved with a permitted barn, meant the contiguous block they needed would never assemble. The enclave, the thing the whole campaign had been built to enable, was dead. Sharon's losses against my zero. Over 3 years I had paid $0 in fines, lost 0 square feet of my land, and broken 0 laws. Against that, the DeMarco development had spent, the figures later entered into the record, over $400,000, assembling options on land it could now never use, and Sharon resigned the HOA presidency she had held for 11 years before the board could ask her to. 11 years, and it ended in one quiet afternoon because she never read a deed. She could have pulled for $10 any day of those 11 years. I built the barn that spring. Casey helped me raise the first wall, the two of us, and Frank and Hollis, the recorder, who turned out to be handy with a framing nailer, and a few of the Stone Hollow residents who had figured out, once the meeting was over, which side of the property line the truth had been on the whole time. We put Dana's woodchop in the back corner, under the window that catches the afternoon light, the way she had drawn it on the napkin I still have, folded in the kitchen drawer. The cherry came down off the rack the first week, after 19 years of waiting, and the first thing I turned on the lathe was a bowl, badly, and Casey took it to college anyway and keeps her keys in it. Casey is in college now, 2 hours away, studying something with surveying in the title, which she will tell you is a coincidence and which I know is not. When she comes home, she walks the western fence line with me out of habit, the 900 feet that started all of it, and we do not say much. The land is still ours. That was always the only thing that mattered. So, here's the lesson plainly because I promised you one, and because it is the reason I told you any of this. If somebody with a clipboard tells you that they have authority over your property, do not argue with them and do not panic. Go pull your deed. It costs almost nothing at the county recorder, and it is the single most useful document most people own and never look at. Read it against the actual ground and against the plat of whatever subdivision claims you. Keep a folder, a real one, paper, dated, and put every letter and every notice in it the day it arrives, because the patient record beats the loud voice every single time, and it beats it in the one place that counts, which is the public record in front of a neutral official. Verify before you fight. Document while you wait. And never assume the loud person has checked the thing they are so sure about. Most of the time they have not. If you have got a story like this, a clipboard that came up your own driveway, I would like to hear it, so leave it below. And tell me how it ended. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe, and you will not miss the next one. And the next one is a good one, about a woman who inherited a mountain spring. Her HOA decided to pipe into their new clubhouse until she produced the water right, her grandfather. Filed in 1948. I will see you then. Take care of your land.